The Dark Souls franchise has set a whole new standard for melee action RPGs, and together with other IPs in the FromSoftware library, have given birth to a whole new genre of gaming, Soulslike. Inspired by FromSoftware, many other developers have tried to implement the same formula. I'm Josh, welcome to HotFix Gaming. Today I'm bringing you 10 amazing Souls-like games that are not made by FromSoftware. 10. Hellpoint. Dubbed as Dark Souls in space, Hellpoint puts you in the shoes of a lone adventurer thrown into a large world that is devoid of civilization, but full of things that can't wait to kill you. Following the same formula as Dark Souls, the game from which Hellpoint took heavy inspiration, you're not given many directions, but you know what to expect from the game. Explore an area, kill its boss, find the key to the next area, explore that one, kill its boss, and so on. Hellpoint's combat system is solid enough, primarily because it's almost exactly like Dark Souls. I'm not even kidding. If you've seen how Dark Souls works, this is pretty much a carbon copy of it. You've got your dodge rolls, your health, mana, stamina bars, your sprint attacks, and so on. Even the way your character swings certain weapons feels like it belongs in a Souls title. Sure, your stats are named differently. Your Estus Flask is now a high-tech healing injector, and you spend Axions instead of Souls to level up at various checkpoints called breaches, which are basically Hellpoint's take on bonfires. But in practice, everything more or less works the way you would expect it to. 9. Thymesia. Thymesia is a more recent Souls-like game, developed by Overborder Studio and published by Team 17. Set in a plague-ridden world with a unique plague weapon mechanic, you play as a mysterious character dressed as a plague doctor. It features a pretty cryptic storyline, told primarily through lore scattered throughout the world. The combat system in this title feels quite unique and requires you to think on the fly, which in turn makes for some pretty interesting combat encounters where you have to adapt on the spot in order to efficiently dispatch enemies. The plague weapon system allows you to use enemies' weapons against them, which not only means that this combat is engaging, but there are also some cases where it's necessary. There is also a great emphasis on exploration, and the world is delightful, in a morbid and dark way. Venturing into little nooks and crannies could easily bring you face to face with drones or a brutal mini-boss that you were not expecting, and this aspect makes exploration thrilling and unpredictable. Number 8. Another Crab's Treasure. A refreshing take on the Souls-like genre, Another Crab's Treasure markets itself heavily as an attempt to be the cute Souls-like, while at its core it's an action platformer with some very dark and existential themes. At times really fun and sometimes incredibly frustrating, this title is quite the memorable entry-level Souls-like that you have to try. Like many other genre imitators, Another Crab's Treasure's combat is of the dodging, rolling and slashing variety. What makes Crab's Treasure's combat stand out is the ability to at any time swap between shells filled to the brim with unique magical abilities called umami. Surprisingly, when it first came out, the greatest complaint out there was the fact that this title is too colourful for a Souls-like. I've never heard anybody complaining about something being too colourful and cheery, but there you go. Funnily enough, the developers listened to these grievances and as an April Fool's joke offered players the Dark Souls-like mode. Because, you know, players really wanted to play as a depressed crab in a dark setting, for some reason. Number 7. Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Set in a fantasy version of historical China, particularly in the later Han Dynasty of the Three Kingdoms, Wolong has you play as the nameless militia soldier fighting for survival. But the twist here is that, in a similar manner to other Team Ninja's titles, you fight in an absolutely beautiful and diverse world, and this makes exploration an absolute blast. The combat is incredibly satisfying, especially if you can perfect your parry timing, offering an intensely fast-paced combat system. Combat is made all the more engaging thanks to the different forms or stances you can use to defeat enemies, with some enemies only being susceptible to one specific form. At first, it can be challenging, especially if you're used to playing Souls-like with a specific type of character build, but it is incredibly satisfying to defeat an enemy using a style that you're not a master in. A great world, dramatic storytelling and characters, and satisfying gameplay. Wolong should definitely be on your playlist. 6. Code Vein. Code Vein comes from Dark Souls publishers Bandai Namco, but without FromSoftware developing it. The inspiration is clear to see from the gameplay. Its melee combat, character creation, boss fights, and more all remind players of FromSoftware gameplay. However, Code Vein has its own uniqueness in its striking anime art style mixed with hyper-edgy aesthetics, in using your blood as magic, and in the presence of AI partners in combat. The last one adds a unique dynamic to the game and lets its gameplay explore areas Dark Souls shies away from. It's fast-paced and doesn't skip out on any of the edges. And if you're enjoying this video so far, let me know by hitting that like button. Number 5. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. The Star Wars universe does feel like an unusual choice for a Souls-like game, doesn't it? I mean, its stories tend to be more optimistic and futuristic, compared to the grim fantasy aesthetic of, let's say, Dark Souls. However, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has become one of the franchise's most beloved recent video games, all thanks to its adoption of Souls-like gameplay. Dark Souls fans recognize Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order's fluid melee combat and checkpoint system from FromSoftware games. The result is some of the most satisfying action in a Star Wars game ever. However, Fallen Order keeps the inspiration to gameplay only. When it comes to storytelling, it's a much more upfront story that feels like a classic Star Wars movie, something we've all have gotten used to and loved dearly. Number 4. The Surge 2. Fans of the Technomancer will enjoy this futuristic Souls-like developed by Deck 13 and published by Focus Home Interactive in 2017. The first title stumbled a little, with some interesting concepts, but it was the sequel, The Surge 2, that really showcased Deck 13's potential. Based in a sci-fi world, your priority is to explore and survive the fictional city of Jericho. The Surge instantly focuses more on its combat and gameplay than its story. This is not to say that its story is forgettable, but it might feel somewhat lackluster for those who prioritize story over everything else. It also focuses on a loot-based reward system, where you need to break off certain parts of enemies in order to find or craft upgrades for your own character. But this upgrade mechanic does give combat a different edge, making for some interesting weapon combinations and allowing for quite a personalized playthrough. Number 3. Remnant 2. The Remnant franchise puts a unique spin on Souls-like convention. The base combat and gameplay look resembles Dark Souls, but with one core difference. Remnant 2 is a third-person shooter. Players fight through challenging enemies, dodge attacks, and chip away at boss health between rolls. However, they do this with firearms rather than melee weapons. Remnant 2 also builds on Remnant from the Ashes procedural generation to make it a much bigger part of the game. Unlike the carefully crafted environments and enemies of most Souls-like games, Remnant 2 has much more of its content created randomly, up to and including its boss fights and story content. Number 2. The Nioh Collection. The Nioh Collection comprises both Nioh and Nioh 2. While you don't have to play both, there is no reason why you shouldn't. In the first, you play as an Irish samurai named William in the 17th century Japan. This is actually a spin on the tale of William Adams, a sailor who arrived in Japan in the 1600s and gained favor with the Tokugawa shogunate. On the other hand, Nioh 2 sees you create your own character and features a much more action-packed storyline, with a heavier focus on the mysticism of the yokai that was featured in the first game. Nioh 2 acts as both a sequel and a prequel to the original installment, and both feature Team Ninja's trademark stance switching for its combat. Now, it must also be said that Nioh is considered one of the most grueling Souls-like out there, even trumping FromSoftware titles in terms of difficulty. While that will differ from person to person, one reason could be that Nioh focuses more on using various fighting stances for its combat, whereas Soulsborne's allow players some flexibility in their overall build. Number 1. LiesOfP. Finishing off strong, LiesOfP is one of the titles that seemed to be on everybody's lips when somebody asked, "Hey, do you know a Souls-like that's not made by FromSoftware?" Set in a dark, twisted fantasy world based on Carlo Collodi's The Adventures of Pinocchio, you play as the titular marionette, fighting through a broken city in the Belle Epoque. This title is widely compared to Bloodborne, and deservingly so, since even the environmental layout is similar to Bloodborne. One unique feature of LiesOfP that has been really enjoyable to experiment with is the weapon's disassembly mechanism, whereby each weapon in the game comprises a handle and a blade. Each of these has its unique traits, and you can customize your weapons to suit your particular playstyle. For example, you could add a greatsword blade to a blunt handle, shifting how you would handle the weapon and how it scales accordingly to your traits. The world is beautiful, the story is dark and edgy, and almost depressing in a good way, and the mechanics of the entire game make it hard to put the controller down. It helps that it fills the Bloodborne sequel void as well. What other Souls-like that were not made by FromSoftware have you played recently? Do you have any favourites? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you enjoy gaming content and want more, why not check out the 2 videos linked on screen? One of them is actually about the best Souls-likes for beginners. Check it out and see if you agree with the choices.